Welcome to the Deep Dive, the show engineered specifically for you, the well-informed learner.
We take a whole stack of sources, research, expert notes, and we dive in.
We dive deep to pull out those crucial nuggets of knowledge, giving you a shortcut to understanding some of the world's most fundamental forces.
And today, we are tackling a force that is, I think, simultaneously the most powerful and maybe the most invisible in our lives. Culture. This deep dive is all about understanding that silent operating system. It's like this atmosphere that dictates every single part of how we interact.
Everything from the layout of a meal to how you structure an argument?
Exactly.
That's right. And our sources today, they don't treat culture like some kind of museum exhibit, list of traditions or historical facts.
No, not at all.
They describe it as an invisible coach, a coach that trains us from the moment we're born, conditioning our reflexes, setting our defaults.
And I think our mission today is to really pull back the curtain on that coaching process.
Yeah, we want to move beyond just, observing differences and get towards a real self-awareness, understanding why our normal is just one choice among many.
And that's the essential knowledge we're looking for here, that analytical framework. I mean, most people, even very well-educated people, they live their lives just assuming their personal rhythm is, universal.
Right. The way they handle time or conflict or show respect.
All of it. And that assumption, it holds up perfectly fine until that normal is challenged, until you travel or work with someone from a completely different background.
That's the moment of truth, isn't it?
It is.
That recognition of this deep, silent influence is so critical. Culture dictates everything. I mean, how we interpret silence, what we think is rude, how fast we walk.
Even how we show love. If you really want to be well-informed, you have to understand the rules of the game, even if, they were never actually written down anywhere.
Okay, let's unpack this. We just start by defining this pervasive silent coach. What are we actually talking about when we talk about culture?
Let's do it.
So if culture is so subtle, how do we even begin to grasp its definition?
It's a great question.
The sources have these really sticky analogies, and I think they're a fantastic way in. Culture is described as the air we breathe. You can't see it, but it supports every single moment of your life.
Mm-hmm. And it's also the invisible teacher, the one that gives no homework but somehow manages to teach you everything you need to know to function in your society.
That analogy of the air is so powerful because it just highlights how ubiquitous it is.
And its invisibility, that's the key part. You don't consciously choose to put on your cultural norms in the morning like a jacket.
Right.
They're just the environment you exist in. So from a more technical perspective, if you sort of synthesize the sources, culture is the comprehensive way a group of people live, think, and behave.
And that includes all the shared traditions, the values, the customs.
Exactly.
But when you lay it out like that, values, norms, customs, it can sound very academic, a little dry.
It can, yeah.
But the feeling of culture, its actual operational definition, is so much more subtle than that. The sources capture this perfectly when they call it the rhythm we dance to without even hearing the music.
That phrase is just. It's a profound sociological insight. It really is.
It is.
It means that cultural norms are almost entirely subconscious. They're these internalized patterns of behavior that don't require any conscious thought. For example, if your culture values punctuality, you don't sit there and debate whether to leave early for a meeting. You just feel this sense of stress if you're running late.
Yeah, that anxiety kicks in.
That stress response is the internalized rhythm. It just feels inherent. It feels right.
So how does this rhythm operate on a day-to-day level? I mean, we're talking about the scope of cultural influence, and it seems to cover absolutely everything.
It does, from the macro to the micro. The sources point out that culture influences how we speak, how we eat, how we say thank you, and even how we show respect and love.
Let's maybe deepen the analysis there. Can we look at some of those classic cultural dimensions to see the scope?
Yeah, let's take showing respect. In some cultural environments, respect is demonstrated through what we call power distance.
Which is just a term for how a society handles inequality, right?
Exactly. So in a high-power distance culture, showing respect might mean you absolutely avoid direct eye contact with your boss. That's a sign of deference, and it's a norm that's ingrained from childhood.
And in contrast to that,
Well, in a low-power distance culture, or one with just different communication values, avoiding eye contact could be seen as deceptive.
or disrespectful, or that you're just not paying attention.
Precisely. In that context, respect is shown by maintaining direct, engaged eye contact. The goal is identical in both places to show respect, but the cultural programming creates two behaviors that are polar opposites.
And that is the air we breathe. We don't see the underlying mechanism, the power distance. We just act on what we've learned.
Mm-hmm.
What's so crucial for you, the listener, to take away here is that culture isn't just about those big visible things like national holidays or traditional clothes.
No, it's operational in your everyday micro-behaviors. It's in the minute-by-minute decisions you make.
The distance you stand from someone when you're talking,
How long you wait before you answer a question.
or whether you start eating before everyone else is served. These habits go completely unnoticed until they hit a point of friction with a different cultural rhythm.
And those points of friction, those are the true classrooms of cultural awareness.
That's where you're forced to see that the invisible teacher gave you a very specific curriculum, but maybe not a universal one.
So let's look closer at this quiet training. The sources really emphasize that culture quietly trains us like a coach we never see.
Yeah, it doesn't use explicit lessons. It just sneaks into our habits without us realizing. It's all based on experience and observation.
And we can really appreciate the depth of this conditioning when we dissect a couple of the really powerful anecdotes from the source material. They expose the fundamental values being instilled. Let's start with the dinner rule.
Right.
This is the deeply ingrained habit of never, ever beginning to eat until every single person is seated at the table.
Right. And on the surface, that just seems like good manners. But what's the deeper cultural value that this rule is installing in a child?
This is a perfect illustration of the individualism versus collectivism cultural dimension. In many individualistic cultures, prioritizing your own needs, like eating when you're hungry, is totally acceptable.
Sure.
But in many collectivistic cultures, the dinner rule, subtly but very forcefully, instills the priority of the group's harmony, the collective presence over any one individual's desire.
So the rule mandates patience, respect for the whole group. It's about the meal being a social ritual, not just
fueling up. Exactly. So the lesson isn't just about manners. It's about where the individual stands in relation to the community.
the individual's biological clock, their hunger, is taught to yield to the group's social choreography.
Precisely. And this becomes a foundational lesson in that culture about how time is managed and how respect is shown. It becomes so internalized that if you break the rule, you feel this visceral sense of doing something wrong, even if nobody says a word.
Okay, now let's move to the second example, which is a little more jarring. The apology reflex. The instruction was, always say sorry, even if it's not your fault. And the anecdote that just perfectly captures this conditioning is the speaker accidentally apologizing to a door after bumping into it.
That example is wonderful because it just exposes the automatic, non-rational nature of the behavior. I mean, what does apologizing to an inanimate object reveal?
Yeah, what's going on there?
It shows that the apology goes way beyond literal guilt or fault. It's functioning primarily as a social lubricant.
A way to mitigate awkwardness or smooth over any friction.
Yes. And this connects strongly to the difference between high context and low context communication. In a low context world, communication is explicit. Apologies are usually for literal faults.
But in high context environments where all the unspoken cues and relationships carry so much weight,
In those places, the apology reflex serves to maintain face and harmony. The reflex minimizes disruption. It's less about saying, I did something wrong, and more about saying, I acknowledge this slight disruption, and I value our social balance.
you're managing the relationship, not just the fact.
You are. And the moment of realization for the speaker when they noticed they were apologizing to a door, that was the moment they recognized that what feels normal is just what we learned growing up.
That observation is the shift. They recognize their automatic behavior was just a pre-written script.
It's the psychological equivalent of realizing you've been listening to music on noise-canceling headphones your whole life, and then you suddenly take them off and realize there's a totally different rhythm playing outside.
The error becomes visible.
We realize our reactions, our reflexes, our ways of interacting are not human constants. They're highly specialized, culturally conditioned responses.
And here's the essential bridge to genuine cultural awareness. That feeling of your normal rhythm being challenged, of your automatic responses suddenly feeling strange, that only happens when you are forced into genuine contact.
When you meet someone operating on a different rhythm or travel somewhere new, that friction is the initiation.
Until that moment, the brain is just content to assume its way is the only way.
Exactly. The friction forces a cognitive pause. And the pause, That's where the danger of oversimplification of stereotypes creeps in.
Right, that moment of reassessment when your brain encounters a difference is where things can go wrong very quickly.
Hmm.
Because our brains are engineered for efficiency, right? They try to take a cognitive shortcut. That attempt to label something new before you genuinely understand it, that's exactly where stereotypes sneak in.
This point is so critical. Cultural difference is informationally complex. To cope with that, the brain just wants to build an easy file folder,
A simple label.
a simple label. Our sources define stereotypes clearly as simple ideas people have about groups that are often not true. They are the ultimate lazy generalization. A quick, abstract file you grab instead of doing the difficult, time-consuming work of being curious.
And they always rely on absolute language, which is why the sources talk about the danger of always and never phrases that get us in trouble.
Yes, those classic lines we've all heard. Men don't cry, women can't drive. Or that huge generalization that people from that country are always late.
The use of always or never just wipes out individuality. It eliminates nuance. It eliminates reality.
It takes a population of millions of unique human beings and reduces them to a single predictable attribute. It is the polar opposite of being well-informed.
But the sources don't just warn us against stereotypes. They give us this specific, really beautiful anecdote that shows how one single genuine act can completely shatter that fog.
Yes, the context was the stereotype that people from cold countries are themselves cold.
Meaning quiet, serious, reserved.
No small talk, a classic simplification, right? Conflating the climate or a communication style with a fundamental personality.
And the reality, as the traveler discovered, was that moving there meant having a neighbor who would, like a ritual, shovel my driveway every morning before I even woke up.
And the key insight was realizing that the kindness was louder than words.
This is such a powerful analysis of cultural translation.
It is. If you expect warmth to be expressed only through, effusive verbal greetings and small talk, which is a very low context expectation, you will judge a culture that expresses warmth through action and service as cold.
But the neighbor's action was this profound, nonverbal declaration of commitment and community, a very high-context communication of care.
Exactly.
But let me pause here and introduce a little intellectual friction. Is this anecdote not just potentially trading a negative stereotype for a positive one? From cold people to all people from cold countries are secretly altruistic, quiet heroes. How do we avoid just swapping generalizations?
That is the essential question. That's what moves us from just observing to true awareness. The key isn't that all people in that country shovel driveways. The key is what the receiver learned from that one act.
Okay.
The receiver learned to look for warmth in different places. The stereotype was about a lack of feeling. The reality showed a different way of expressing feeling.
So the singular act just serves to prove that nuance is possible, which dissolves the shortcut of always and never.
Exactly. The goal isn't to replace the stereotype with a new, equally rigid rule. It's to introduce enough complexity that the old rule becomes unworkable.
That makes sense.
And this is why the sources use that powerful analogy that stereotypes are like foggy glasses. You just cannot see the distinct individual. You can't appreciate the nuance of their actions until you wipe those glasses clean.
The stereotype just obscures your perception.
Completely.
And the cleansing agent is personal experience. The source tells us it requires one genuine conversation, one act of kindness, one brave woman behind the wheel.
It's that personal, lived engagement that forces the abstract label to collapse.
And when that label disappears, the implication for our perception is profound. We stop seeing categories.
We stop seeing the file labeled cold people or bad drivers.
And we start seeing complex, individual people. And that transition from generalized judgment to genuine engagement is what's necessary for the next phase, which is deep adaptation.
So we've established that the culture we're born into trains us, but what happens when we choose to immerse ourselves in a new one?
Right. The sources suggest that culture reprograms you in small ways.
Yeah.
And the key word there is subtlety. This isn't an explicit demand. It's an organic, unconscious adaptation.
Well, the brain is highly motivated to reduce stress and maximize efficiency. So if a local rhythm demands a different behavior, the brain, just to ensure survival and smooth social functioning, starts adopting the new pattern.
We see this perfectly in the queuing example. The speaker was used to a rushed, high-speed pace, often prioritizing individual action. Then, after moving abroad, they caught themselves suddenly queuing patiently. Calm, waiting my turn.
Which led to that internal question, who am I?
Exactly. What's happening to me?
This shift often centers on how a culture manages time, which is a massive differentiator around the world. This specific case points us towards understanding monochronic versus polychronic time orientation.
Okay, so monochronic cultures, like many in Northern Europe and North America, they schedule time linearly. One thing at a time, stick to deadlines, ordered queuing.
And the adaptation suggests the speaker was likely coming from a more polychronic environment, or at least a less rigid one.
Where multiple tasks are handled at once, relationships are prioritized over schedules, time is more fluid.
Precisely. The adaptation shows the brain learning the new social choreography it needs for the monochronic system. The behavior changes because the brain learns that the local social efficiency demands patience and order. You don't need a sign telling you to cue. Your internal system just adjusts to the dominant frequency.
What's so fascinating is that you only notice the full extent of this reprogramming when you go back home, and your old habits suddenly feel jarring or wrong.
Your identity hasn't been erased. You've just layered new programming over the original.
And that layering effect is why we need to understand the different psychological approaches people take when they face this cultural friction.
Mm-hmm. The sources give us this very memorable framework: the fighters, fearers, and flowers. It describes the spectrum of how people respond to change.
Okay, let's break down the psychological drivers for each of these, because I think we've all been one of them at some point. First, the fighters.
The fighters reject change completely because their original culture offers them psychological safety. Change is a threat to their competence.
So by judging the new culture, why can't they drive like we do? They protect their self-esteem and avoid the stress of learning something new.
They're trapped by the conviction that their way is the only correct way.
Okay, then we have the fearers, the complainers, defined by chronic anxiety and a refusal to engage.
The fearers are perpetually stuck in nostalgia. Their focus is always back home this, back home that. They suffer from chronic stress because they are physically present, but psychologically they're resisting.
They're not rejecting it out of superiority, like the fighters, but out of fear of the unknown.
Exactly, which prevents them from ever seeking understanding.
And finally, the most successful responders, the flowers, the adapters.
The flowers thrive on cognitive flexibility. They realize that adapting doesn't mean you surrender your identity. It means you're acquiring new tools. They just go with the flow. They observe, they listen, they blend in.
And this approach is just intrinsically linked to being flexible.
Mm-hmm. This group understands the powerful surfing analogy from the sources. They realize you can't change the ocean, but you can learn to surf it.
That is the definitive insight into agency and adaptation, isn't it?
It is. Trying to change the ocean, the core cultural norms of a place, is exhausting and it's fruitless.
But choosing to learn to surf, to adopt the local rhythm and flow with it, that makes life easier.
Yeah.
It reduces stress, and crucially, it makes the whole experience more interesting.
The flowers allow the new culture to add new layers to their identity. And in doing so, they enrich their understanding of the world and turn what could be obstacles into opportunities for growth.
So as we master the art of being a flower and embracing adaptation, we enter what might be the most profound phase of cultural awareness. This is the realization that the more we learn about other cultures, the more we learn about ourselves. Culture becomes this powerful mirror that shows us our own deeply ingrained habits. This is the moment of true reflection.
The mirror effect is transformative because we rarely, if ever, notice our own speed or our habitual silence or our tone until we see it contrasted in a reflection.
You just assume your behaviors are neutral.
Exactly, until you see how they're interpreted by someone who's been programmed differently. The sources give us that excellent anecdote about a direct communication style clash in an office.
Yes, the speaker, coming from their direct programming, used this action-oriented language. Let's do it. Meanwhile, their new team, operating under a different cultural code, used much softer consensus-seeking language, like, maybe we can try this.
And this clash just perfectly illustrates the difference between direct and indirect communication styles. The speaker's "let's do it" is low context, it's task-oriented, it's confident. And in a culture that values clear, explicit instruction, that style is very efficient.
But the team's language, maybe we can try this, suggests a highly collaborative and maybe more indirect approach.
Absolutely. The team is managing relational harmony. Using softer language gives people space for input, it saves face if the idea doesn't work out, and it could align with a higher power distance where demanding instructions from a peer is seen as inappropriate.
So what felt confident and efficient to the speaker.
It felt instantly pushy or rushed or even demanding to the team.
And if the speaker doesn't pause to analyze that tonal difference, if they don't look into the mirror the team is holding up, the meaning gets totally lost.
Worse than lost. The speaker risks being seen as rude or dismissive, and they could completely sabotage that professional relationship. It's not about changing the message, it's about translating the tone.
Stepping outside our cultural bubble forces this self-examination. People become mirrors.
They show us things we were previously blind to. Our default conversational speed, our comfort with silence, the boundaries of our sense of humor, our assumptions about authority.
You realize your speed isn't fast, it's just faster than theirs. Your silence isn't neutral, it's less comfortable than theirs.
And that self-awareness leads to the critical turning point in personal growth. Once we see ourselves through that cultural reflection, we stop trying to be right and start trying to be kind.
That shift from right to kind is the sign of maturity, isn't it?
It is. The whole concept of right is revealed to be culturally constructed. Your way of driving or speaking or managing time is just a way, not the universal correct way.
And once you drop the need to defend your cultural certainty, the energy just shifts entirely to connection and empathy.
You realize that shared humanity is much more important than defending some invisible rule you learned as a kid.
And that profound shift brings us to the universal principle that really transcends language, rhythm, borders, kindness. The sources reinforce this powerful idea that kindness is the real language everyone understands, no subtitles needed.
And this is where we see the limits of relying just on verbal communication. Nonverbal cues, what we could call emotional transmission, often carry far more weight than perfect grammar.
You can see this in that powerful story about the old man at a market in Turkey.
Yes, the traveler couldn't communicate verbally at all with the old man, a complete language barrier.
And yet, the message was conveyed so clearly when the old man, without any words, showed this hospitality and care just by handing me tea, smiled, and patted my shoulder.
That experience illustrates that politeness and respect don't always need words. Sometimes the core message is transmitted through tone, patience, or presence.
The nonverbal cues signal your intent, your safety, and they just bypass the whole cognitive complexity of translation.
This introduces the metaphor of emotional Wi-Fi, this universal signal that allows you to feel when someone is being respectful. You don't need to understand the specifics of their cultural code if you can sense that underlying emotional transmission.
Full bars on the emotional Wi-Fi means the connection is strong, no matter what your verbal skills are.
Exactly. And conversely, someone could speak your language perfectly but convey irritation or impatience through their tone, and that connection just fails instantly.
Our primal human mechanisms are just finely tuned to detect respect or disrespect, independent of local language.
They are. And maintaining that strong emotional Wi-Fi signal depends on one fundamental attitude: curiosity.
If you enter a cross-cultural interaction with judgment, assuming their differences are faults, you just block the signal entirely.
But when we stop judging, we start understanding. Curiosity is the active choice to assume positive intent and to seek the underlying reason for a behavior.
It ensures the signal stays open.
Right, it allows you to interpret the cueing not as an inconvenience, but as a commitment to social order. Or the soft language not as indecision, but as a commitment to consensus.
Which brings us to the poetic conclusion that wraps up this whole journey of awareness. Every culture, with its unique rules and rhythms, its dinner rules, its apologies, its time standards, has its own beautiful melody. But if you listen with an open heart, if you listen past the surface noise of difference, you start to hear the harmony beneath it all.
And that harmony is the shared human commitment to community, to respect, to connection that underlies all the different expressions of culture. The specific melody might differ drastically, but the fundamental notes of our shared humanity are constant.
The more we listen to that harmony, the more connected we feel, even when our words are different. And that's the highest function of language and culture, to build bridges between hearts and minds.
This has been a true deep dive into the invisible coach that shapes us all.
It has. We started by defining culture as that unseen rhythm we dance to, quietly training us through habits like the dinner rule and the apology reflex.
Which we now understand are really expressions of core values like collectivism and high-context communication.
We analyzed how our brains seek shortcuts, leading to stereotypes that function like foggy glasses, and how only personal, genuine connection can wipe them clean.
And critically, we understood that the adaptation process, becoming a flower, embracing flexibility, is key to layering new understanding onto our existing identity, often by shifting our internal clock from monochronic to polychronic demands.
And we learned that the highest form of cross-cultural engagement is the mirror effect, where others show us our own speed and tone, shifting our priority from being right to seeking connection and kindness.
We ultimately ask not who is right, but what can I learn from this difference?
Since we learned that culture often sneaks into our habits without us even noticing, here is a final provocative thought for you to carry forward, applying the analytical lens we've developed today.
Think about a group or an environment you've recently joined in the last year or so. Maybe a new professional team, a specific online community for a hobby, or even a local volunteer group.
What is one small, specific habit? Maybe it's a piece of jargon, standard for time, like how quickly you have to respond to an email, or a nonverbal cue, like how much background noise is okay on a video call, that you have absorbed from this new group.
A habit that you now treat as utterly normal or just the way things are done.
Now, using the framework of cultural dimensions we've discussed, consider how that single, seemingly mundane habit might be completely misunderstood, or misinterpreted as rude, or just be plain confusing to someone from your old environment.
What invisible rule, what new rhythm of power, distance, or context have you just learned without ever taking a class on it? And what does it reveal about your new cultural landscape? Keep those observations sharp, stay curious, stay kind, and keep adding those rich new layers to your understanding.